Okay, good. Good. Uh, Actually, I prepared some the empirical evidence, but we skip it. Uh, Here it. Okay, good. So this is the better to explain the empirical and critical analysis of the HPSS. Uh, okay, the best practice versus best fit. So the HPSS empirical literature has generated one of the most intellectually productive debates in strategic HRM. So the tension between best practice, so universalism, and best fit contingency. So this debate has profound implications for how firms should design and implement their HR systems, and for how researchers should study HR performance relationship. So the universalist or best practice position associated with it Pfeffer and Hazlitt argues that a specific bundle of HR practices consistently including the 6 practices we have discussed above, so generates superior performance in virtually all organizational contexts. Okay, so according to the Pfeffer's book, certain HR practices work across industries, firm sizes, competitive strategies, and national contexts because they tap into fundamental features of human motivation and capability that do not vary substantially across context. So the contingency or best fit position associated with Schuler and Jackson is, and most influentially with the HR strategy alignment literature, argues that the performance effects of HR practices depend critically on the degree to which those practices are aligned with the firm's competitive strategy. Okay, so their landmark AMG paper applied Porter's sorry, supporters general strategy to HR design, a cost leader strategy on recurring behavioral characteristics of high sorry repetition, so low risk taking like and predictable output calls for very different HR practices than different HR strategy, which requires creative behavior, high tolerance for ambiguity, and long-term oriented as well. Okay, okay. So here's the good example for that. The strategic position and cost leadership position, so require employee behaviors, high repetition, and conformity with standardized product schedule, and low risk taking, and short-term orientation, efficiency focus as well. So HR practice implications that tight behavioral control, standardized work design, output-based pay, narrow job definitions, minimal discretionary benefits. So, when differentiation requires employee behaviors, creative, innovative behavior, long-term orientation, willingness to take risks, cooperation, and knowledge sharing, customer centricity, like that. So HR practice implications is that result-based control, the broad job scope, intrinsic motivation emphasis, extensive training and team-based design like that. And a focused niche strategic position. The required employee behavior is that deep expertise in a narrow um, domain, relationship management with a specific customer segment is quality over quantity orientation. So HR practice implication is the professional development model, expertise-based compensation autonomy within domain, and strong culture or of domain excellence like that. Okay. We move on to the next part, talent acquisition and retention as a competitive advantage. So human capital as strategic resource, the RBV Foundation. So the intellectual bridge between strategic HRM and corporate strategy theory runs through the resource-based view as Jay Bani. So he established that sustainable and competitive advantage requires resources that are simultaneously valuable, rare, enable, and organized, which is a real framework. So the question for HRM is whether the human capital can satisfy all four real conditions and under what circumstances. So some academic people is provided a seminar IBB as analysis of human capital in their academic of management review, AM review, AM review. Uh, so their core argument is that human capital, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and motivations of a firm's employees can be a source of sustainable competitive advantage when it satisfies the real conditions. However, so they make a crucial distinction that many subsequent researchers have overlooked. It is not individual employees who constitute the strategic resource, but the human capital pool in the aggregate of the skills, knowledge, and capabilities across the workforce, and the HR systems that develop, deploy, and retain that pool. So here is the example. The first is valuable. So application to human capital is that human capital creates value when it enables the firm to respond to market opportunities, serve customers, or reduce the costs in ways that generate competitive advantage. So here is HR practice implication. HR practices must develop capabilities aligned with strategy, um, capability aligned with strategic requirements, and value is strategic contingent, not absolute as well. And rare application to human capital is that a firm collective human capital pool is rare when the specific combination of skills, knowledge, experience, and relationship um, it embodies is difficult to replicate it um, in the external labor market. So here is the HR implication. So invest in the first specific human capital development, build unique team combinations and organizational knowledge throughout tenure and collaboration as well. And next one is that inimitable. So human capital is inimitable when it is embedded in a firm's specific routines, relationships, culture, and organizational learning that cannot be replicated by hiring away individual employees. So application to human capital is that build social capital um, alongside human capital. Is to create organizational routines that embedded tactics knowledge, cultivate a culture that cannot be replicated through the simple imitation. And last organization is that the firm must have HR systems capable of deploying human capital effectively. So matching people to roles, enabling collaboration, managing performance, and retaining contribution. So HPWS provides sorry. HPWS provides the organizational architecture to leverage human capital. So poor HR systems waste human capital even when it is valuable, rare, and inimitable. Okay, so we move to the next talent acquisition strategy, signaling, uh, screening, and competitive positioning. So talent acquisition, the systematic process of attracting, assessing, and hiring human capital is one of the most consequential strategic activities a firm undertakes. So every hiring decision is an investment decision. It commits resources, shapes organizational capabilities, and determines the future trajectory of the firm's human capital pool. So many firms invest more analytical rigor in capital expenditure decisions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, huge amount of money, than in hiring decisions that will determine organizational capabilities for years. Also, the economics of talent acquisition can be useful analyzed through the two theoretical lenses, signaling theory, 신의론, and human capital theory, by the Becker. As both lenses reveal important strategic dimensions that pure operation or recruiting frameworks miss. Okay, so actually, signaling theory is the economic theory. So this theory was developed in the context of educational credentials as signals of productivity. So in his model, the highly productive individuals invest in acquiring credentials, for example, degrees, certifications, prestigious employment history, not because the credentials themselves make them more productive, but because the cost of acquiring those credentials is lower for high ability individuals than for low ability ones. Making credentials credible is a signals of underlying ability. So employers unable to directly observe productivity before hiring, so rationally use credentials as screening signals. So the strategic insight for talent acquisition is that firms face a symmetric signaling problem. Just as job candidates signals their quality to employers, employers signal their quality to candidates. So high ability candidates who have the greatest number of employment options, so will most carefully screen potential employers for signals of organizational quality. So for example, culture, development opportunities, leadership and compensation practices, and strategic positioning. The firms that signals that these qualities effectively attract a higher quality applicant pool, The firms that failed to signal them attract candidates who could not secure positions at higher signal employers. So, okay. Okay. So, employer branding as a strategic asset. The systematic management of a firm's reputation as an employer in the labor market is a strategic response to this signaling dynamic. The firms like Google, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, and SpaceX invest heavily in employer brand management, not because they are altruistically committed to candidate experience, but because their employer brand is a strategic asset that dramatically reduces the cost of acquiring top talent while simultaneously increasing the quality of their applicant pool. So the notable some is LinkedIn as the most attractive employers ranking are not the vanity metrics. So they are indicators of strategic positioning in the market for human capital. Okay, so I would like to give some example for that. Mm, Tesla and Ford. So Ford is the traditional automaker, right? So how does it signals its quality as an employer? So what signals does Tesla operational pace? So Elon Musk leadership style and equity heavy compensation structure send to different segments of the talent market. So who do these signals attract? So, and who do they repel? And is that repulsion strategy? So, so I hope you guys pause this lecture and think about these questions. Okay, okay. Uh, Actually, I prepared some talent acquisition tools, but we pass it. And then next, pass it for it. I'd like to talk about the retention, talent retention. The talent retention and the capacity to keep valuable employees engaged, committed, and employed. So it is the complement of a talent acquisition, and it is analytically the more complex of the two. So the difficulty of retention analysis stems from the fact that turnover is neither uniformly costly nor uniformly avoidable. So the strategic challenge is not to minimize turnover at all costs, but to retain the right people at the right cost while managing the departure of those whose continued presence no longer serves strategic interest. Okay. Uh, Casio provides a comprehensive framework, actually. I'm going to make the new page. Oh, so So Casio is calculating the full economic cost of employee turnover, which extends far beyond the visible cost of recruiting and training. The full cost of a voluntary departure and replacement includes separation costs, for example, exit interviews, administrative processing, and also severance and replacement cost, advertising, agency fees, recruiter time, candidate assessments like that. And onboarding and training cost, for example, orientation, formal training, informal mentorship time like that, and productivity loss cost, the performance gap between the departing experienced employee and incoming new hire during the replacement and learning period like that. So for professional and managerial roles, the total cost of a single voluntary departure commonly reaches 50 to 100% of annual salary. It's quite high, right? So, and for roles with long learning curves, specialized expertise, or rich client relationships, it can exceed 300%. So these numbers make the retention management one of the highest return investment available to strategic HR functions. So most firms dramatically underestimate turnover cost by tracking only the visible components like recruiting fees and training costs. So while ignoring the larger productivity loss components that is harder to measure but economically dominant. So that's why the organization try to reduce the turnover rate and try to focus on the talent retention. Okay, so let's take a break, then back to the class.